So, against my better judgment, I would like to talk about the discourse surrounding Taylor Swift. Obviously, given the enormous size of Taylor's cultural relevance, I'm gonna have to narrow that down. Her celebrity has become a nexus point for discussions on race, gender, wealth, intellectual property, environmental responsibility, music criticism, political apathy, too many men having too much access to podcasting equipment, etc. The main catalyst for this specific conversation, though, is obviously the Rolling Stone piece published on December 9th of this year, as it is essentially about a lot of that other discourse. It alleges that much of the negative press Taylor's received this year, particularly through discourse associating her with a secret Nazi ideology or just generally conservative politics, has been fueled by a coordinated bot campaign launched by an unknown party for unknown reasons. Response to the article has been mixed. Fans of Taylor Swift unsurprisingly took the report as indisputable evidence that their fave had been unfairly targeted by a malicious smear campaign, while Taylor Swift detractors quickly labeled the article a calculated PR move, attempting to correct Taylor's declining image ahead of her highly anticipated docuseries, which premiered later that week. Now, neither side is making completely groundless accusations. As reported by Rolling Stone, research conducted by the AI tech startup Judea found that a significant amount of the online activity perpetuating negative claims about Taylor from October 4th until October 18th, the 2 weeks following the release of Taylor's latest album, The Life of a Showgirl, was performed by a small number of accounts exhibiting bot-like behavior, where Judea claims to have found a significant user overlap between accounts discussing Taylor Swift and accounts participating in the AstroTurf campaign against Blake Lively. This is all reasonably being perceived as evidence that some portion of the online conversation surrounding Taylor are both inauthentic and intentionally aimed at harming her reputation. The reasons for why she would be targeted are unclear, but at the very least, it does appear that something is happening, and it makes sense for Taylor's fans to be alarmed by that. Those painting the release of this article as a result of Taylor's efforts to manipulate public opinion, however, aren't making totally absurd observations themselves. Obviously, the timing of the article is interesting given Taylor's docuseries premiering just a few days later. But let's be real, article or no article, this series was going to be a success. I mean, the album that sparked so much of the negativity around her is already her most polarizing and negatively reviewed album to date, and it's still a record-breaking smash hit because Taylor Swift is too big to fail. What seems to be fueling suspicions around the article and Taylor's potential involvement the most, though, is the fact that Rolling Stone was the outlet to publish it. For a while now, the magazine has pretty explicitly become a Taylor Swift-friendly publication, and to an obnoxious degree. Rolling Stone's music critics heap praise onto her new releases, even for work that most critics, and often Swifties themselves, deem subpar, while a handful of the outlet's writers frequently publish separate articles or podcast episodes specifically intent on celebrating Taylor or defending her against detractors. Even as someone who generally likes Taylor Swift and Rolling Stone, I do not read Rolling Stone pieces about Taylor Swift because the ass-kissing has become a little too blatant to take seriously. It is weird that Rolling Stone was the outlet to break this story, and the Swifties clearly know it, because when a tweet calling the report the weirdest PR move from Taylor yet started to gain traction the night of the article's release, a community note popped up within hours specifically emphasizing the fact that Rolling Stone wasn't the only outlet to share Judea's findings. This effort to fact-check is ironically laden with factual errors. For instance, it says that the research data came from the same agency that provides online monitoring insights during election periods, but no? Judea, the company that produced this report, is a tech startup founded in 2023 which uses AI technology to track social media activity as a tool for businesses in order to maintain control over those businesses' online branding. The company provides a service to people working in PR. They don't do election tracking, or at least I haven't seen any evidence of them doing that. It's certainly possible that they've worked with some political campaigns during an election, but again, The company was founded in 2023, so even if their client list was public, which it's not, I have to imagine that it's a pretty short list in the first place. The only research Judea has ever publicly released is their recent report on Taylor Swift, which they did release to Rolling Stone exclusively upon publication. That's why the word exclusive is displayed above the article's title. The community note claims that Judea's data was shared with Rolling Stone and other outlets for investigative coverage, which is kind of true, but it's still a severe misrepresentation of events. Once Rolling Stone's article came out, Judea published the full 9-page report onto their website, thereby allowing other publications, like the ones linked in the community note, to write their own articles on the findings without having to cite Rolling Stone specifically as their primary source. The outlets did still have to cite Rolling Stone, though, while quoting Judea's CEO, since Rolling Stone was the only outlet that spoke with the CEO directly, because it was an exclusive report. Now, did Taylor's team pay for this report to be made? Well, according to Rolling Stone, Judea's head of customer service was the one to suggest the company look at the conversation around Taylor after she had a gut feeling that the ideologically charged remarks about the life of a showgirl might trace back to manipulative actors. Assuming that's the true origin for the report's existence, then Taylor's team had nothing to do with it. Employees of Judea looked into this case on their own, either because Judea's staff is populated by Swifties who wanted to use the technology to scratch a personal itch, and or because they knew that publishing a story like this through a mainstream news outlet like Rolling Stone would be good PR for their company. I suppose it's possible that Taylor and her team were involved in some way, and I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing. Inauthentic activity stoking online hate campaigns poses an increasing problem on the internet, and it's a problem that disproportionately affects women in the public eye. Women like Blake Lively. Given Taylor's own experience with Snakegate and the hashtag Taylor Swift is over party, where there are also suspicions of some inauthentic activity, I think she's well within her right to want to know how much of the online chatter about her is even real, and also well within her right to want people to be aware of how her public image could be getting manipulated by bad faith actors. That being said, I definitely don't think Taylor Swift paid for this research or the subsequent article about it, for the simple fact that if she was interested in obtaining the type of service that Judea provides, she for sure has enough money to hire a company that's better at providing it than Judea. 'Cause straight up, this report is ass. I think we should first acknowledge the degree to which many people don't seem to understand what the report actually says, which is understandable since Judea itself doesn't seem to totally understand what it's saying either. The community note I mentioned writes that findings show over 18,000 accounts were identified as inauthentic, but that is very much not the case. In their official report, Judea claims that their system analyzed 24,679 posts from 18,213 users across 14 platforms from October 4th until October 18th. Within this time frame, they claim to have identified a polarized online environment shaped by a mixture of organic cultural discourse, symbolic reinterpretation, and targeted inauthentic activity, wherein a majority of users behave typically. However, a small amount of users, 3.77%, exhibited non-typical behavior amplifiers and accounted for 28% of the overall conversation. So no, 18,000 users were not identified as inauthentic. 3.77% of 18,213 users were identified as likely inauthentic, so about 686 accounts. And those likely inauthentic accounts contributed to a disproportionate amount of the online discourse. It's the 3.77% of users contributing to about 28% of the conversation that's the significant part. But one of the big problems with Judea's report is the fact that it never actually clarifies how its system identified those bot accounts. I don't personally doubt that some amount of the discourse was stoked by inauthentic activity, but Judea's lack of transparency about their own methods is frustrating, to say the least. especially since this is an AI startup with no established reputation, I don't feel comfortable assuming that the information Judea provides is reliable, since I have no reason to trust a set of data presented to me with little to no clarity on how that data was collected in the first place. That makes the entire report Rolling Stone is relying on already questionable. But where things start to exit the territory of iffy and enter the land of, oh, come the fuck on, is where the report starts making claims about the supposed overlap between the online criticism surrounding Taylor Swift and the separately established AstroTurf campaign against Blake Lively. According to the report, Judea identified 2,395 overlapping accounts active in both the Taylor Swift dataset and the Blake Lively AstroTurf dataset. Now, because the data collected for the Blake Lively campaign is specifically identified as the Blake Lively AstroTurf dataset, my initial assumption is that that dataset is made up of accounts already identified as potential bots. How those bots were identified and where those numbers even come from, I have no idea, but I also have no idea where the Taylor Swift dataset in this section comes from either. And it's not just because Judea isn't transparent about their process, it's also because the number they provide in this section isn't the same as the number they previously reported in this document. It's close. It is very close. But earlier, Judea was claiming to have analyzed posts coming from 18,213 users, yet when assessing the supposed overlap with the Blake Lively dataset, they present the Taylor data as coming from 18,209 users. I hate to be picky about that, but where do the other 4 users go? Why aren't the numbers the same? Is this from a different dataset altogether? If so, where is any of the information on how that data was collected? What's going on? Then, what's even more frustrating is the fact that the report already claimed that only 3.77% of the original 18,213 users displayed suspicious behavior. Again, only about 686 accounts were suspected to be bots. But the overlap between the Taylor Swift and Blake Lively datasets is reported as 2,395 users. First of all, how is identifying the overlap in these instances even helpful if you've already presented your findings as a comparison between the data collected from an AstroTurf campaign made up primarily of bots to more general data made up dominantly of authentic users engaging in discourse organically? What could this exercise possibly accomplish when a majority of the 18,209 to 213 users from the Taylor Swift dataset aren't bots? Really, though, I only presumed the Blake Lively dataset was made up mostly of bot accounts because Judea's report called it the Blake Lively AstroTurf dataset, a dataset of, again, unclear origins. It doesn't really make sense, though, if the number of overlapping accounts is over double the number of bots identified in the Taylor Swift dataset, since that means that at least 1,709 accounts exhibited bot-like behavior when engaging with Blake Lively discourse, but then displayed authentic human behavior when discussing Taylor Swift? How does that work? How are you only a real person part-time? You get a job in customer service, that's how. Now, a part of me wants to just assume that I'm the dumb one who's not interpreting this data correctly, but Judea already makes such blatantly contradictory claims within their own report that I can't pretend to trust the company's findings. In the opening summary of the document, Judea specifically states that they found a significant user overlap between accounts pushing the Swift Nazi narrative and those active in a separate AstroTurf campaign attacking Blake Lively. This is already a very weird conclusion for Judea to come to, since the dataset they were using for Taylor was never narrowed down to only including the accounts that participated in any sort of Nazi narrative against her. A majority of the users whose activity Judea was tracking were deemed to be normal social media accounts, most of which did not participate in the Nazi discourse. So already, it feels like a big leap is being made here, but then in the section more specifically talking about the amount of overlap between the Blake Lively campaign and the collected post made about Taylor Swift, Judea states, the overlap is overwhelmingly typical, indicating that normal users engaged with both narratives, suggesting broad cultural interest rather than just conspiracy adoption. So it kinda seems like the reason there's overlap between the discourse around Blake Lively and the discourse around Taylor Swift is just that people who are interested in talking about Blake also tend to be interested in talking about Taylor. And I mean, that makes sense considering that Blake and Taylor are, or at least were, very close friends. Their narratives were pretty thoroughly intertwined with one another from the beginning, so of course there's overlap in the people talking about them. Now, given that Justin Baldoni's smear campaign against Blake has also involved Taylor to a large degree, I don't really doubt that a significant amount of the bots participating in the Blake Lively nonsense are maybe also participating in nonsensical conversations about Taylor Swift, but Judea never presents any evidence of that, even though they're trying to make it seem like they have. It is, simply put, a very, very bad report, which ultimately doesn't aid either woman's cause. Thus, I think if anyone was looking for good PR here, it was probably Judea, who might have taken the report to Rolling Stone specifically because A, they thought that would be the best way to get Taylor Swift's attention and possibly attract her as a potential client, and or B, they knew that as long as they were defending Taylor Swift, the We Love Taylor outlet would be more likely to ignore all the glaring flaws in their report compared to other big publications. I can't even get mad at Judea for it, because getting mad at an AI startup churning out incomprehensible bullshit in the hopes of making a bunch of money is like petting a tiger and then being shocked when it bites your arm off. I'm way less concerned with Judea's work and motives here than I am with the fact that Rolling Stone, a mainstream news outlet, decided to publish what they maybe thought was another defensive Taylor Swift puff piece, but which turned out to be free advertising for a tech startup of questionable value. I'm not going to make this a call out on the person who wrote the article because I think they've contributed perfectly fine work in the past, and surely there are editors working above them that bear some responsibility here. But the Rolling Stone piece just kind of fucking sucks, and in ways that are actually hard for me to articulate because it's all just such a jumbled mess. I mean, firstly, the article opens with the claim that shortly after the release of The Life of a Showgirl, there were social media posts accusing Taylor Swift of implicitly endorsing the MAGA movement, trad-wife gender norms, and even white supremacy with dog whistle references. I really can't emphasize enough, though, how unclear Judea's report is when it comes to actually clarifying what conversations it was that the company was tracking. The only two specific-ish points of discourse mentioned are from when some social media users spread a claim that Taylor was using Nazi symbolism, alongside the fact that some users eventually started comparing her to Kanye West. Already, I have never even seen the Kanye comparisons on any of my timelines, so I truly don't think that's a point of rhetoric that needs to be emphasized here. As for the other thing, when the document mentions Nazi symbolism, that is something that I did see, thus I know what that means in relation to Taylor Swift, as does the author of the Rolling Stone piece, but Judea never expounds upon that conversation beyond those two words. If you were only reading the official report and you hadn't seen the discourse on your own social media feed, you would have no clue what the allegations of symbolism refers to, opening up a gap of information that Rolling Stone fills in by clarifying that a necklace for sale on Taylor's website stirred up Nazi comparisons because its lightning bolt charms bore a passing resemblance to the bolt pattern worn by the SS. And okay, fine, whatever. The Rolling Stone writer is better at communicating the context for this conversation than whoever it is that put together the report for Judea. That is, if it was a person at all, and not just another robot. I'm willing to overlook that part. But then what about the other points of discourse the author is framing the results of this report around? I mean, yes, there were social media posts accusing Taylor of implicitly endorsing the MAGA movement, but the Judea report doesn't really talk about that. I guess you could infer that that is a conversation the company was tracking, since even though Judea never mentions the fact that Taylor was accused of endorsing the MAGA movement, It does vaguely reference MAGA allegations and political reframing as a high-risk cluster of social media activity. Again, the Rolling Stone author is filling in gaps by contextualizing what MAGA allegations probably refers to, and that fill-in is certainly reasonable. But what about tradwife gender norms? The article states, the cluster of evidently coordinated accounts pushed the most inflammatory Swift content, including posts that framed her relationship with fiancé Travis Kelce as inherently conservative or trad, in quotes, with all of this framed as leftist critique. Yeah, so the Judea report never mentions anything about tradwives. And alright, again, I guess you could infer that the report is making reference to tradwife accusations since it lists relationship politicization, in parentheses, Kelce/NFL, as another high-risk cluster of activity, but at this point, it's starting to feel like the Rolling Stone author is projecting a fair amount onto this report that isn't really present in the data the report presents. You know, the report that the article is supposed to be reporting on. Relationship politicization could be in reference to like 10 different conversations. And if Judea didn't clarify what conversations it was tracking in the data the company presented to Rolling Stone, I don't think it's totally appropriate for the author of the Rolling Stone piece to just decide what that means on their own in such specifics. The issue is, because the Judea report is so indistinct in its claims, the Rolling Stone writer has taken it upon themselves to decide which conversations surrounding Taylor Swift get to be portrayed as originating from a smear campaign, even if the author hasn't received enough concrete data to hang those conclusions on. Like, one of the medium-risk cluster activities from the report is named as cultural appropriation and AAVE debate. Rolling Stone seems to frame this point as Taylor's use of the term savage on the song Eldest Daughter being interpreted as racist, but that's way more specific than anything Judea claims, and also, it's a little dramatic, don't you think? I mean, to go from cultural appropriation and AAVE debate to she was accused of racism for using the word savage just ignores a lot of the nuance that absolutely did exist in some of the spaces hosting the discussions on the AAVE present in Taylor's lyrics. The Rolling Stone writer then immediately dismisses the entire conversation, though, as being ridiculous, implying that this is one of the points of discourse that so clearly originated from a targeted smear campaign. But I think the fact that even Judea classified cultural appropriation and AAVE debate as being a medium-risk cluster for inauthentic activity already implies that it wasn't that fucking simple. Were some of the conversations around Eldest Daughter ridiculous and intentionally inflammatory? Yes, but some of them were also perfectly reasonable expressions of annoyance at how Taylor and other white pop stars, but especially Taylor, use terms originating in Black culture, then present them with an attitude of underhanded irony. Taylor saying, "I'm not a bad bitch and this isn't savage," in a song about how secretly vulnerable she, the epitome of white women, is maybe kind of racially coded behavior. Not in like a she's intentionally promoting a white supremacist ideology kind of way, but in a if a Black person were to interpret this as a microaggression, I could definitely see their point kind of way. And the thing is, there were people who legitimately saw some of the lyrics on this album as being a bit microaggressive-y, and plenty of those people were being totally fucking reasonable with their critiques. I don't think it's fair to portray everyone engaging in the cultural appropriation and AAVE debate as having fallen for a ridiculous hate campaign intent on calling Taylor Swift a racist, especially when conversations surrounding Taylor's appropriation of Black culture aren't fucking new. The article writes toward the opening that online discussions of Taylor's new album turned extreme in ways that many found bewildering. While the far right have been known to claim the singer as an icon of Aryan greatness despite her record of championing Democrats and liberal values, let's not talk about how disappointingly short that record is. The recent backlash was a noticeably divergent trend, an apparent attempt to cancel Swift for those presumed affiliations. And I'm sorry, but are we really gonna pretend that Taylor Swift receiving backlash from people with more progressive agendas is a completely new phenomenon? Like she's never been canceled by the left before? Like some of the conversations surrounding Eldest Daughter and Wishlist and Opalite weren't piggybacking off of conversations that previously surrounded Shake It Off and Wildest Dreams and her 2019 BBMA performance. That claim about many people finding the recent backlash bewildering works as one part of a larger thesis statement for the entire piece. It's meant to provide a basis for the idea that many of the negative conversations around Taylor at the moment are the result of astroturfing by emphasizing how strange the discourse around her has become, but is the discourse around her that bizarre? I mean, if you traveled back in time to April of this year, and you told me that Taylor Swift was going to release a brand new album in the coming months, and that as soon as it dropped, people would be parsing the lyrics and then accusing her of racism alongside some other moral misdeeds, I would have been like, yeah, sure, that sounds about right. It's like we've been here before. Back in 2017, a blogger dedicated over 2,000 words to accusing Taylor of alt-right affiliations, and that conversation gained so much traction at the time that Taylor's team sent the writer a cease and desist, which then prompted the ACLU to step in and remind them that bloggers unfortunately do have First Amendment rights. And yes, Taylor was under a significant amount of scrutiny back in 2017 too, and yes, I do think that some amount of astroturfing might have been at play during that era as well, but some of the things she was being criticized for was also fair, and the blogger she and her team were threatening to sue was definitely a real person without any apparent ulterior motives for writing that post. She seemed to genuinely believe that Taylor was sending out racist dog whistles, and even if there were bots helping allegations like that gain momentum on social media, the full extent to which inauthentic activity was amplifying all the various points of controversy isn't something we will ever have the data to know. And that's true with every conversation that takes place on the internet. Targeted astroturfing campaigns have been a thing since the start of social media, and the problem has been growing at a rapid pace for the last few years because A, that thing that happened in the spring of 2022 showed a whole bunch of powerful people how shockingly easy it is to spread a false narrative. B, Elon Musk deciding to make likes private on Twitter makes it very hard to tell when a tweet is getting most of its engagement from accounts likely to be fake. And then C, the growing prominence of unregulated AI technology is kind of ruining everything. That makes the fact that this report is coming from an AI startup a bit ironic. I know that the kind of AI Judea uses is different from generative AI, and I don't think that all AI usage is bad for the record. Labeling a tool as using AI technology is more of a marketing gimmick at this point than anything else. But in this instance, it's a gimmick that's being used to obfuscate the details of Judea's data collection, which is sus as hell. Don't worry about how we generated any of these results. We can't show our work because we used our magic robots that are never wrong. Also, their website just looks like a company selling AI slop, but I digress. We are in dead internet territory. It is harder than ever for any of us to know the degree to which the discourse we're engaging in is being manipulated by bad actors, and it's a fucking nightmare. For that reason, I do, to some degree, appreciate this Rolling Stone article for highlighting that issue. As the author of the piece states, understanding how easy it is for inauthentic users to manipulate public discourse should probably give you pause the next time you scroll past an opinion that seems precisely engineered to piss you off. I agree. We should all try to be more vigilant about how we interact with highly inflamed conversations online, especially those which seem aimed at vilifying a woman in the public eye, since a lot of people seem to hate when women dare to exist publicly. Even when I first read the article, though, before I read the actual research it's based around and noticed the glaring problems in the data, I already found the tight focus of the piece to be kind of manipulative in and of itself. Okay, a small number of seemingly inauthentic accounts were contributing to a large percentage of the online discourse around Taylor Swift. Let's first acknowledge that we don't have enough data to conclusively say that the suspected bots were only or even primarily interacting with negative stories about her. That definitely is how the data is framed in both the report and the subsequent article, but Judea never provides enough information about all the conversations they were tracking and what all the supposed bots participating in those conversations were actually doing to say that anything super nefarious was going down. The most concrete data Judea provides revolves around dates, not topics of conversation. Like, according to the document, only about 10% of the online activity from October 4th and 5th was deemed to be generated by non-typical accounts. The report frames the conversations happening on these days as being normal celebrity and music commentary, but there's no breakdown of the specific rhetoric any of the tracked accounts were engaging in. We get the first spike of seemingly inauthentic activity on October 6th and 7th, where reported 35% of the total posts were generated by non-typical users. But what exactly were those non-typical users doing? Judea states that these dates mark a time period in which a small but concentrated cluster of outliers and fringe accounts began circulating claims that Swift is using Nazi symbolism. But is that what the entirety of that 35% was up to? I mean, how do I know that a good portion of those non-typical users weren't still mostly participating in normal discourse about the album? Judea isn't providing enough data to say that the bot accounts were contributing to the discourse in an overwhelmingly negative fashion. It is possible that most of the inauthentic activity was being generated by bots that were just programmed to engage in culturally dominant conversations, which at the time would have been Taylor Swift's newest album. Even if we conclude, though, that there was a positive correlation between the amount that bots were engaging in Taylor discourse and the amount that that discourse became conspiratorial, which, to be clear, we don't have the data to conclude that could still just be explained by the fact that inflammatory accusations tend to get more online engagement than nuanced discussions, and high engagement rates is something most bots are trained to follow. The biggest problem here is that Judea and Rolling Stone are framing this data as evidence that it was Taylor Swift specifically being targeted by a hate campaign, and that's something you can only really prove if you're also tracking the inauthentic activity that surrounds other public figures and other topics of conversation. They didn't do that. Instead, they chose to focus their research and reporting on how one pop star is being affected by a larger systemic problem that she's most likely not a unique victim of, nor does her platform seem all that affected by the quote-unquote attack on her. At one point in the article, a theory gets presented that maybe a foreign entity of some kind wants to target Taylor Swift because if they can significantly impact her public opinion as an icon and political figure of sorts, then their success can act as a test run to see what else they can get away with on a potentially larger scale. And wow, what a great point. It would be terrible if a country like, say, Israel, realized that they could employ astroturfing tactics to manipulate public opinion in favor of their ethno-state. But they're already doing that, aren't they? Even if there is a targeted bot campaign against Taylor Swift, it doesn't seem any more sophisticated than other AstroTurf attacks, plenty of which produced far greater damage to their victims. Like, we're way past the point of needing to do a test run to see if non-human accounts can sway public discourse. Of course they can, and everyone working in PR knows it, so what are you talking about? Later in the article, the author writes, "There's no doubt that Swift elicits a strong response, one way or the other, from much of the listening public. Yet there's no reason to assume that anyone dismissing her stated politics to weave a paranoid fantasy about her secret reactionary positions is sincere." And, few things about that. First, I find the use of the word paranoia here a bit funny. Throughout the article, the author treats many of the criticisms against Taylor as if they're all patently ridiculous and conspiratorial, and some of them are, definitely, but I wouldn't say that any of them are that much more ridiculous, conspiratorial, and indeed paranoid than the theory that a bot campaign like this could be a test run for a larger political force to prove that they can take down a woman as powerful as Taylor fucking Swift. As if her reputation being significantly damaged by some bot-influenced internet chatter was ever a realistic possibility. If Snakegate couldn't take Taylor down, back when her net worth was about 1/10 the size it currently is, plus she hadn't even released Folklore yet, nothing that's happening right now can touch her. Taylor's ability to remain one of the most successful pop stars of a generation isn't being threatened by any of the narratives this report is concerned with, and the author of the article clearly knows that. When somebody on Blue Sky joked that Taylor's PR team was working overtime ahead of her docuseries release, he replied and said, "Forgive me, but is this documentary really in danger of not being a massive hit like everything else she does?" And no! It wasn't. Because this quote-unquote coordinated attack that you're writing about was never hurting her or her brand in a meaningful way. I'm glad we agree on that, but then why did you write the article then? If it was to bring awareness to the prevalence of bots on social media, I think acting like this is an issue that's targeting Taylor Swift specifically is probably not the most effective way to do that. This article has just taken a macro issue and given it a micro focus that completely undermines the universality of the problem. So either Rolling Stone published this article for clicks because they know that a large amount of the public is more interested in Taylor Swift than they are in confronting how utterly fucked we all are by the state of online media, or this writer just wanted to defend Taylor against criticisms that he finds annoying, so he found a more journalistic way to do that than just admitting he wants people to shut up. I mean, this entire article is written in such an overly defensive and dismissive tone, acting like all the conversations around Taylor and her politics are conspiratorial when so many of them just aren't. A vast majority of the people who've been criticizing Taylor's political output in the last year aren't trying to assert that she secretly voted for Trump. They're not paranoid. They're frustrated that her stated politics have hardly any follow-through whenever holding progressive values is no longer fashionable. It feels like the writer is just indignantly offended at the idea that people would dare question the great Taylor Swift, Rolling Stone's favorite billionaire. Like, how dare you challenge the sincerity of Taylor's stated positions? She endorsed Kamala last year. Shouldn't that be enough? Sure, she has more power and influence and money than a vast majority of the people more affected by the rising fascism of the United States will ever have access to. But you know what they say. With great power comes a whole bunch of people up your ass asking why you're letting the White House use your songs for their propaganda. I mean, it's so annoying. And I'll admit, I did and do think the whole Nazi dog whistle narrative was kind of absurd. Even if Taylor privately held white supremacist beliefs, which I don't think she does, at least not to a degree where she would actively identify as a Nazi, she for sure isn't going to try to advertise that side of herself to the public. Even if it's in dog whistle form, even if the current administration has made blatant racism more socially acceptable, to think that she was going to go from endorsing Kamala Harris in 2024 to being like, psst, I hate minorities and I would like other people to know about that, less than a year later on purpose, it is just kind of silly. Still, I'm not going to deny that the necklace the accusations come from looks bad, and I thought that the second that I saw it. There weren't any TikToks or tweets or Reddit comments swaying that opinion. I saw the image of the necklace on its own and thought, somebody probably should have caught that. But part of the reason I definitely don't think Taylor was trying to do a dog whistle through her merchandise is because I don't think she's involved in the creation of that merchandise, like at all. She should be, she has the power to be, but despite the Rolling Stone article referring to her brand as meticulously managed, Taylor's professional output has gotten hella sloppy in the last few years. That's true for the music, it's true for the merchandise, it's true for the basic-ass lyric videos I paid $13 to see in a movie theater, then had to listen to the instrumental for Fate of Ophelia like 5 times and watch the music video twice, and it's true for the JCPenney-ass looking website she's currently using to hawk her shit. I think the amount of people actually checking the things sold under the Taylor Swift brand is probably a bit too small for a brand that big. The opalite necklace already should have never been sold just due to how tacky and cheap it looks. But it maybe does say a lot that even with a brand that powerful, no one in a position of authority on Taylor's team noticed that one of the items they were about to sell kinda looked like it contained a pretty well-known hate symbol. I don't think Taylor Swift is a secret Nazi, but I do think that she and her team should start being a bit more careful about what they put out into the world, especially in the current political climate. And I don't really understand this gut reaction that so many people have to act like she's not the face of a multi-billion-dollar business whose output should be adhering to higher standards than the one she's currently operating with. Taylor Swift is not just a cute little singer-songwriter from Pennsylvania anymore. She is one of the most powerful people in the world, and obviously that doesn't mean that every criticism against her is automatically valid. Some of it is dumb as hell, and she definitely can still be victimized in various ways, both personally and professionally, but it's very unlikely that any of the conspiracy theories being lambasted in this Rolling Stone piece are going to produce any real material effects on her life. Now, I do think that beyond any personal harm done to her, the fact that she's become such a representative for a specific type of American girlhood means that how people talk about her has an impact on countless women and girls, especially her fans. When a stadium full of football freaks start booing her just for existing amongst them, I have empathy for how personally upsetting that would feel to her, and I'm horrified at the thought of that kind of misogyny remaining normal in sports and internalized by all the young girls who had to see that. Some of the ways that Taylor Swift is talked about online and in mainstream media and in the world is absolutely disgusting, and that shit should be challenged at a mass scale. But what exactly is the argument here regarding the commentary on her alleged racism? Taylor Swift might not hear your crazy conspiracy theory, but your billionaire friend who sells cheap-ass, suspicious-looking lightning bolt necklaces to a mass market will? As long as Taylor isn't being fully deplatformed for relatively benign offenses, I don't think it's a bad thing for people to engage in discussions about her power and privilege. I do understand the people who get frustrated by the knowledge that nobody would be trying to check Taylor's privilege like this if she were a male billionaire rather than a female one, especially one with an overwhelmingly female audience. But just because no one holds men accountable for their bullshit doesn't mean women should operate from the same obscenely low standards. And then B, as someone who's been stanning pop stars her entire life, watching a woman you love get trapped in the cycle of widespread celebration to widespread backlash and back again is just part of the gig. The Swifties are in a better place to combat the narratives against their girl than most other standums. So sorry if I don't feel that bad that people are being kind of mean to Taylor Swift right now, when the woman just released a record-breaking album, is in the middle of releasing her own wildly popular docuseries, had her engagement celebrated over intercoms in public spaces, while mainstream outlets like Rolling Stone are bending over backward to shame people engaging in critical conversations about her. I mean, do you know what's happening to Britney Spears fans right now? When someone in Britney's family finally gets a job and can afford to pay for their own targeted bot campaign, I'm gonna have to buy a gun. So I encourage the Swiftie population, to whom I am an ally, to just unclench your assholes a little bit and try to enjoy your girl's continued success instead of constantly trying to portray her as a vindicated victim of some new backlash. Taylor Swift is gonna be fine. As for the rest of us, I guess we'll see.